Hey everybody, Questwise here, and today we're going to talk about the history of our hobby, that is the tabletop role-playing game hobby. I love history, and I love our hobby, and so the blending of the two, the history of our hobby, just seems natural to me. And I've been in the hobby for quite a while, not as much as some of you guys, but I've been playing since about 1991, 1992, somewhere in there. So I've got my lion's share of the hobby history down as well too. But recently, because of the influx of popularity of Dungeons and Dragons lately, there are a lot of new people in our hobby. There are tons of new folks, gamers, hobbyists, all jumping into the hobby right now with little to no idea of what the history of the hobby was and where it all originated. And so I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think it's very important for someone to know exactly where the hobby began. I think it gives that much more of a rich sort of feeling to the game once you know exactly where the origins lie in this game as well too. And you can see the reason why we do certain things, especially in Dungeons and Dragons, and we talk about like the D20 system and how certain things work and the reason that they do in a certain way. I think is one of those things that you'll find if studying the history and the origins of the hobby itself, and you'll understand exactly why those things are done in such a way. I have a top 5 list. There are a few others out there, and it's really hard to say that this, how to rank these top 5, because they're all interconnected in some way, whether it be they share a writer, or they share an idea, they share an event or something as well too. So I can't really ever just say, this is the top 5 in whatever order. So in no particular order, we're going to start with of Dyson Men by David M. Ewalt. This book is, I think, the first one I picked up on the history of the hobby. It's clever in the of Dyson Men, of Mice and Men, a clever tie over between the two. But this is a story of not just the origins of the hobby, but also the fandom behind it and the people who play it. And so it's an amazing read. This is a phenomenal book. I really, really enjoyed this book. I think that Mr. Ewalt has a great sort of view into the sort of fandom of the hobby behind role playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, and it just gives a great account of that, the early beginnings of the hobby in a brief history, but then sort of reaching out into the people that are playing it today as well too. And I believe this is a little bit older, so it might only go up through maybe 4th edition, but still awesome read. Definitely check this out if you like the more of the fandom side of Dungeons and Dragons. Next up is Michael Whitworth's. We'll see his name again pop up in the future in just a few minutes. Empire of Imagination. This is a interesting history of the hobby, and because it's told in short vignettes, almost as if they were like little short episodic sort of memoirs of Gary Gygax and the birth of the hobby itself, and it goes all the way through the malaise of the satanic panic, and actually I believe this one, it's been a while since I've read this one, but I believe this one actually starts with Gary being fired from TSR. So an interesting point to where this picks up and how it's told. But again, very, very cool. And again, like I said, we'll see Michael's name pop up here in just a few minutes again as well. Next up is kind of a new one to me. This is Appendix N by Jeffro Johnson. This is a collection of essays about the books and the fiction from Appendix N. If you don't know what Appendix N is, and I'm sure a million of you do already, but for those of you who don't, Appendix N, if you were to look inside the first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide, there is at the very back of it an appendix. He lists the different appendices, um, covering a bunch of different topics. But Appendix N was always the most famous for a list of required readings or recommended readings that Gary drew from in order to sort of gain inspiration for designing Dungeons and Dragons. There's a number of books listed in there, and what Jeff O. Johnson did is he went through and he read all of those books and all of that fiction from Appendix N and created this as a collection of essays on his thoughts concerning each of those, as well as some in the back here. There's a few other things as well too. He talks about some different game systems and has an interview with Ken St. Andre, and a few other things as well too. Definitely worth picking up. I will readily admit I have not read all of the fiction in Appendix N. Like I've read a lot of it, and I've read it because of the Appendix N being such a famous idea. But this is a great way to sort of not have to read all of those things and get a good idea of what was behind the Gary Gygax's mind when creating D&D as well too. So Appendix N by Jeff O. Johnson. This one can be a little bit tougher to find. I believe it's published by Castelia House, but just by looking at the book itself, I'm pretty sure it's a print on demand. You might be able to find this through Amazon or abebooks.com or something like that as well too. So check that out. Next up is a brand new addition to the world of the history of D&D, and that is Art and Arcana. This is put out by Wizards of the Coast. This book is beautiful. If you're a fan of D&D, if you're just a fan of fantasy wargaming, or just a fan of fantasy art, this is the book for you. This book exceeded my expectations. Like, it blew my idea of what this was going to be out of the water. I thought this was just going to be a coffee table book full of great art from the past, and it's so much more than that. It is literally a visual history of Dungeons and Dragons from the very, very beginning up until very current iteration of 5th edition. It's even insofar as it talks about some of the fandom with Critical Role and stuff as well too. So very, very brand new, very, very up to date. This book is amazingly well put together, and this was a collaboration between several people: Michael Whitwer, Kyle Newman, John Peterson, and Sam Whitwer. The attention to detail put into this book is just phenomenal. Like, even insofar as that, if they're describing a piece of art or talking about a certain piece of history on the page that you're reading it, that section of the text actually ends on that page. No flipping back and forth and stuff. Very well put together. Very intuitive the way that this thing flows. Beautiful book. I highly recommend you go out and get a copy of this. It comes in 2 different versions. This is the standard version. There's also a special edition version that comes with a bunch of art prints and other secret stuff as well too. Do it. You're not going to be sorry for this, even if you're just a fan of fantasy art as a whole and its evolution over time. So definitely worth checking this out. Now, I mentioned John Peterson being one of the co-authors of this. Being a history nerd, being sort of a scholarly type person, I love books. I'm a bookseller by trade. Our next book and the final book in this, and definitely by far not the greatest or least in this whole list, is Playing at the World by John Peterson. This is the be-all and end-all of the history of our hobby, of gaming itself, whether it be talking about tabletop wargaming, role-playing games, card games. It's in here. This thing is a beast. It is huge. I've got notes all throughout this book, tags and stuff all through here. To be completely honest with you, I have not made it all the way through. I still have, a couple more chapters to go in the back of here. Playing at the World is the most academic, scholarly look at our hobby to date that I can think of. This reads like a history book. folks. I'm not gonna lie, it's not a fun sit down read like some of the others. Michael Whitwer's book, the Empire of Imagination, is fun to read. It is just a quirky, fun ride through the history of our hobby and sort of the life of Gary Gygax. But this one is not. This one's going to read a lot like a textbook. If you're not into that, you might not enjoy this at all. But it goes into the minutia of everything that led up to the creation of Dungeons and Dragons and beyond. So again, very tough book. This is a little bit harder to find, but it's still out there. I think the popularity sort of re-blossomed after we got Art and Arcana, because John is a historian when it comes to role-playing and gaming hobbies and stuff. There's several videos on YouTube of him showing off different collections of memorabilia throughout the history of the hobby. Definitely worth go check those out, especially when he shows off some of the original box sets and stuff as well too. But this book is amazing. It cranks in at about, with the index, about 700 pages. But is amazing, and talks about everything from the early days of the zines and in Gen Con being Lake Geneva Con, back in the day before it was moved to Indianapolis. I mean, this book is just, it has it all, and it talks about everybody and things, and just the birth of the hobby as a whole. If you want to go in depth, Playing at the World, please check this out. This is amazing. This is the be-all and end-all of the hobby. Definitely worth checking this out. If you want something a little bit lighter, I highly recommend either David Ewalt's of Dyson Men or Michael Whitwer, Empire of Imagination. Both a little bit more fun to read. If you're really into art and Arcana is the way to go. If you're really into fiction behind the game, Appendix N by Jeff Rowe Johnson is definitely the way to go. So a little bit of touch on the history of our hobby and different ways to enjoy it and different ways to explore it beyond just playing the games themselves. Next time when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Dungeon Master Guide throughout history. We're going to go a little bit into depth into each edition, starting at the first edition, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and working our way through each edition until we reach 5th edition, and how the evolution of the game has changed on what Dungeon Masters are supposed to be doing to run the game, and the suggestions that they create in there as well too. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this. If you have, please like and subscribe, share, all that great fun stuff. I guess that's all I had to talk about today. Again, great stuff. And until next time, I'm Questwise, and we're out.